All right, we made it to Friday, which means it is time to put on our GPP bro hats. We're going to dive deep into the weeds of the Week 10 main slate with our very special guest here. It is none other than Lord Reebs. Super excited to talk to him about all of the data-intensive research he does for these slates, how he applies it to his own DFS lineups and strategy. Let's do it.
I suffer from a debilitating condition known as atropic shockitis.
Peter's one of the greatest depositors I've ever seen.
Trust the process. Let's go. Let's go.
I got auto matched with Levitan. This is bullshit.
If I just go the other way, in that 66, I win all the money. All the money.
If I had 150 lineups, I'd win too.
Process over results.
Make a bitch go crazy. I don't know which one of these my baby. Bust out AP, 35 bullets in your head like KD. Bust it, bitch go bust it. And I had 10 pints with me in Russia.
Hey everyone.
I just saw your tweet saying the only one picture of me exists on the internet, and I am definitely in lazy thumbnail season where every time I'm like, I could go look for another one, but I already have this one from when you were on the randomizer show, and I'm too lazy to go find another one. So I'm sorry, Rich. You need to send me a catalog of photos.
Yeah, Hoko wants me to take like pictures so he can make like them. You know how Hoko is. Hoko wants me to do like a bunch of goofy pictures, but everyone just uses that same picture of me, which is fine, but it's funny though. It's just, that's from like 6 years ago. I think I in the DLF in like some DLF article or something.
I mean, it's very on brand too for what we want to talk about today. These micro edges, the cheat codes. So you know the Konami code stuff works. But I will up my thumbnail game. And I mean, the last time we got together for a show, Rich, you were belting out Saved by the Bell theme songs.
Yeah, it was a good time, the randomizer. And then, I watched Evan come on the randomizer and completely just stonewall you. Just absolutely, you got Derrick Henry, like stiff arm. The randomizer never took such an L on a show.
I probably deserved it. I was flying a little too close to the sun, asking all of you really nice people to get really outside your comfort zone, do stuff to make yourself look silly. And yeah, Silva just rubbed my face right into the dirt.
You know me, we've hung out. I don't mind looking like an idiot. I write about every football player every week. There's enough out there to make me look bad already.
How has your season been going? I know you guys, like you and Evan, who do the super, comprehensive pieces. I know you guys always look forward to the big bye weeks.
We haven't really had those this year. I mean, 14 buys are as large as it gets. We had 116 buy. The next 2 weeks are only 2-team buys. So it's going to be thin, especially that Thanksgiving week with only the 2-team buy. That one's going to be a little rough. Absolutely. But we're grinding. We're making it through it. I mean, the good thing is that writing an article like that, I got my finger on the pulse of a lot of different things. So it helps.
Yeah, no, it is good. And I mean, one of the, big things too, that I wanted to talk to you about today, and I talk about this with Karain a lot now that he's writing the walkthrough over at NBC Sports Edge, and this, how you kind of make that transition from, being super in the weeds on specific player situations, liking certain spots, matchups, etc., but then also transitioning to DFS, which can just be a very simple numbers game. At the end of it, do you find yourself kind of falling in love with plays that are hard to get off if they don't ultimately project well? Or how do you find handling that push and pull?
Yeah, it's very difficult. And yeah, I definitely tend to, glom onto some guys and with conviction. When you're talking about DFS in specific, if you're playing large field tournaments, like you said, it's the numbers game. You're trying to take the way like true leverage is gained at DFS is you're trying to take what you believe is going to happen versus what the field believes is going to happen. And that's how you win money. So, I mean, you can get into trouble that way, when you're wrong, right? Like your conviction pieces are wrong and the field is right. So there's definitely a balance you try to find there. I used to be, someone that I tried to do like the MME hat for a while, for a couple of years, and didn't have a lot of, success that way. I'm enjoying a lot more success this year, just kind of like honing in and doing a lot of low to mid-stake single entry stuff for the first time. And it's been really enjoyable. I haven't banked anything yet, but I've been profitable up until last week. Last week was an absolute disaster. Yeah, so I mean, that it's definitely very tricky because you write up all these players every week. You're looking at all this analysis and you're saying, the field's wrong on this guy, or I'm right on this guy. And it could really lead you down the wrong path sometimes in your wallet, in your DFS account.
Yeah. So are you working when you make your lineups? Are you a hand builder? Are you using projections, or what's kind of your process there?
Yeah, I am now because I'm not, like I said, I'm not really doing, the multi-entry stuff. I will Thanksgiving. So like the Thanksgiving slate, I'll 150 enter a bunch of stuff
Yeah.
because it is what it is. I was doing it for a while, like on small slates, treating every like afternoon slate like a Thanksgiving slate. Like trying to get like the 4 p.m. and treat that like a Thanksgiving slate, right? And
Yeah.
do that. And I had some success like that for a little bit, but then it's just too much work. You're going through all the projections at the end of the week with all the other work that I'm doing, and killing a Saturday. So like now Saturday's like my only free day, like family time, and that's when you need to be on. When you're building like 150, you got to be on Saturday. Make sure everything's tight up all the projection stuff. Make sure you're getting leverage on the field. Make sure you're not doing, things you shouldn't do versus what the field's going to do, because you're going to lose that leverage. So now, yeah, I'm mostly hand building. I usually center around like typically, in the single entry stuff to maybe the 3 max stuff. I'm circling around like basically like 3 to 4 quarterback plays I love, and I'm building my lineups around those. And it might be like a game or a cheap guy or something like that. But typically, that's the style I've gone with this year, and it's been successful so far this season. And then when we get into like I will like, obviously I'll throw a lineup in like the millionaire and stuff like that. And, we're going to expand our horizons and, maybe do like a Trevor Lawrence stack or something stupid. But, like, because that's what you get. That's what it takes to kind of win, to have some fun. Because you still want to have some fun and cheer for like the outrageous stuff to happen too.
Yeah. Do you find what contest size would you say, like field size, you're generally kind of to target? Are you being kind of purposeful with that, or just more stake driven, whatever's in those ranges?
Yeah, typically, from a monetary stance, still I'm looking first, but then, I want to get in stuff as small as possible. And, even in the non-tournament stuff, like they're not like, I guess, official cash games, but I love to do like the 3-man 109s and stuff on FanDuel, or like the 3-man 50s. And like that, I treat those almost like cash games. But then when we're talking like, just like on like the tournament side, typically anything under 2,000 entries and the lower, the better. I want to get into, cause I'm a lot like Holka. I only play on FanDuel tournaments. That's like all I do now the past couple of years. So I'm very much like mini Holka light. That's why we get along so well. We do those shows together because we speak the FanDuel language, and everyone lives in the DraftKings world, I know. But so like, it depends if I had a good week the week before, I might shoot up and fire off in like the 444, like the 888 there, just because if I ran hot the week before. And that's what we're using for. We're having fun, man. All this is disposable income. Hopefully, if you're playing and you're listening, it's all disposable income what you're putting into this. Because you have a week like last week where I entered. I came away with $0, absolutely $0. So you got me on a good week on the show. You're listening to advice from someone that won $0. So top-notch analysis right here.
That's how it goes. That's GPP life. Do you find when on FanDuel in those smaller contests, are you kind of running the Holka style where I know Holka loves building kind of the onslaughts, even sometimes the triple stacks. Mm-hmm. Are you kind of, trying to go with that approach of getting, as few things right as possible, or what kind of is your general playing style with those tournaments?
Yeah, that's how I've really kind of moved on. I've kind of like progressed instead of being like a more pragmatic, cash floor game builder like for years, and coming away and being profitable that way, but never really winning any like real like big money like that, and just wanting to have more fun and saying like, yeah, if I get all this stuff right, then no one can really take me down. I mean, that's kind of how I've gone. Try to get as few things wrong as possible, and then when you're right, and when you're right on those things, you're gonna smash.
Yeah. And playing exclusively on FanDuel, and I haven't been playing much at all over there, but what are some of everyone's aware of kind of the usual quirks of the scoring settings, more touchdown heavy with the half point PPR, the pricing has been a little looser. Are there any other kind of things about the kind of the settings or the structures over there that you particularly gravitate to, or why you like playing over there?
I mean, I've talked to a couple people about this over the years, like Davis Mag stuff. Because I've always been more of someone that's a fantasy analyst, a regular fantasy analyst. I build my teams that are my redraft teams that are like touchdown centric anyways. Like I am someone that believes that touchdowns are like slightly more predictable. Now they're still random, but they're slightly more predictable in terms of like player archetypes. Everyone hears me. I talk about player archetypes all the time and all that stuff. So I kind of gravitate towards like the touchdown dependent scoring anyways, and being a little bit of a better player. And I think that gives me an edge in terms of understanding the players that do well there. I also believe, just because like, I talked to Leone about this too, is that FanDuel, a lot of people like get down on the pricing of FanDuel because it's looser than it is on DraftKings, but it also makes, flatter ownership. In terms of, there's less chalky plays on FanDuel. And when the plays are chalky, it's easier to kind of avoid them as well, because they don't get like the kind of bonuses. Like even if Devontae Adams is chalky on FanDuel on a slate, he's not going to go for like 45 on FanDuel because of the scoring. He's not going to get the 100-yard bonus. He's not going to, the 11 catches aren't going to carry as much weight as they will on DraftKings. And then some of the chalkier plays, it's easier to avoid there, which I think it makes lineup building a lot more fun, because I don't have to totally glom on to the players. Although this week we're going to have the highest owned player of the season on this slate, particularly when we get into the weeds, and I guess specifically in week 10. But it does make it a little more easier to kind of not fade the chalk, but just you don't have to go so crazy on FanDuel, and I do appreciate that.
Yeah. Where are you at? The hot topic of conversation this year has been the bring back conversation. Are you kind of on team bring back with the way you're targeting game stacks, or are you trying to pick your spots with it?
It depends on what tournament I'm playing in. So if I'm in something where, like we talked about, if I'm like in a low field entry, like say like under like 150, I'll more it's more conducive to me where I want to bring back, or maybe onslaught. Because if I'm right, then nobody can win but me, right? Yeah. Or I'm gonna be in the circle, of winning, the circle of trust, the dollar trust. So that I will do that. But if it's larger field, and as I'm progressively, as the field's progressively getting larger, I'm more inclined to, only if it makes sense, to do the bring back or onslaught. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, and because you were just mentioning the thing with like the Devontae Adams dynamic, the same thing happens on the lower end. I always remember the Chiefs versus Jets game last year, and it was like you could bring it back with Braxton Berrios, for 3,300, because he can get 6 catches for 60 yards, and that's going to more than pay off his salary as a nice viable bring back and allow you to get the studs. Like on DraftKings or on FanDuel, I mean, you need those touchdowns with that bring back. Like that play isn't going to be in viable over there.
Yeah, and we're living that right now with Dan Arnold. So Dan Arnold's been a really great play on DraftKings the past 3 weeks, and on FanDuel he's just kind of whatever. And the tight end pricing doesn't go as low. You don't get like a min price tight end on FanDuel isn't as great as a min price tight end on DraftKings for a number of reasons in terms of percentage of salary and everything. So a guy like Dan Arnold, like he's got to get into the paint. He's got to get in the paint to really help you to make that 5K kind of pay off. But at 2.6 or 3K on DraftKings, those 8 for 64s are pretty awesome. Like absolutely amazing.
Yeah, for sure. And, Tony's asking this question here about, having interest in playing in FanDuel. How would you recommend figuring out adapting to the scoring system? And this is something, it sounds like you're similar in that you want to focus on this one specific thing, give all your brain power to these settings and get really familiar with the specific contest and scoring. That's how I've kind of been on DraftKings. Although with our tilt space lineups with Holka, we are going to be, continuing to play in a single entry tournament on FanDuel. And so I'm trying to force myself to be outside my comfort zone. And it is hard for me to juggle the variables and switch back and forth. And I know when we talk to Hulk on Sunday mornings too, it's hard for him to kind of pivot over there because the things are so different. But I mean, my first recommendation to Tony here would be to run some optimal lineups with FanDuel projections, just so you can get a feel for what are the best projected plays and really start to review the projected ownership and the projections and just kind of see who's popping over there. And it also gives you some fun arbitrage opportunities where you can get your Dan Arnold exposure on DraftKings, and then you don't have to worry about playing him on FanDuel.
Yeah, and that's why I switched a couple years ago. I was double dipping on both sites, and I found just like the point of flip flopping my approach was too much was bleeding over into each excited, like, into each build, I would be like, oh, I love this guy in DraftKings for these reasons. And then it would bleed into, well, I should get some exposure to him on FanDuel when he's not really a FanDuel play. And it was suboptimal. It would actually hurt me. It hurt my play on both sites, being on both sites and kind of spread out. And I just found out that my ROI and stuff was a lot better on FanDuel. And I just said, oh, I'm going to kick DraftKings out, except for, like I said, I'll go over there and throw some milli lineups and throw some for fun. But that's all. Like I said, I expect to lose. It's just for grins, like wishing well stuff. But that's why I switched those, because I was having trouble in my brain, like compartmentalizing each site and how I wanted to play, each site. And I did get too much bleed over, and it hurt me playing. And I said, I'm going to go play at FanDuel because I've been way more successful there.
Yeah. Do you find with your doing your data intensive research on the worksheet, do you find kind of that you're in a good way, kind of in your own silo of stuff, as opposed to us who might be listening to more content, hearing good plays? Sometimes that's helpful because you can kind of ID who's getting steamed, where's the ownership pushing toward, but sometimes, you can be a little swayed by stuff. Do you like kind of generating your own thoughts for each slate and not letting outside ideas impact you?
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things I take pride in having that article come out so early, because if you are a subscriber or you follow on the site, and next week will be free week, so everything will be free next week. But games start coming out on Tuesday afternoon. I'm writing these games up early in the week because I don't want to be influenced. I want my research and my data to be the first thing that goes into how I'm feeling about each game, each player, and so on. And then I get my exposure through podcasts, because I don't consume a lot of football content just because I work on this so much. And me, and you're someone like me too, you have a lot of outside interests, and I do too. And football season takes up so much time that I can't use all my free time on listening to football podcasts and watching football shows. I just can't. But these shows that I'm on with guests, I like getting the varying opinions and seeing, the counterpoints and stuff like that, because I get to do a few shows a week. I do a show with Daigle and Dean on Roto Grinders on Wednesday. I have a guest on my show every week. I get to do a show with Davis Maddock every week where we kind of just like riff on the games, and we pick games. And then I do a show at Dan Pizzuta from like a real football angle. I let that stuff kind of, bleed in to kind of the outside opinions, but I just can't consume this much stuff. I have too much other interests in life. I have a family, and football takes up so much time. But I'd like that. Doing that article at the beginning of the week is my own foundation. It's my foundation, and I try to build off of that as much as possible.
Do you find it, like between, for me too, Sundays before lock end up just being this mad dash of, content responsibilities, checking in with Leona and Hulk on our lineups, trying to get my personal lineups in the right contest, updating our season long FFPC rosters. One thing that I wish I had more time to do is kind of rerun projections and recheck kind of optimal lineups after inactives come out, because that's what I do for showdown slates. And it's like, you can't even play showdown if you're not running stuff after inactives come out, because those little micro adjustments are so massive. And I feel like that's probably my biggest leak right now, is just not having enough time to adjust to the super late breaking stuff. How do you kind of juggle that versus, like you said, you get dialed into some of your plays, you're on your guys even really early in the week. How do you kind of balance still being reactive to super late news?
It's hard because from a content perspective, I do a Sunday chat with subscribers right when inactives come out, 11:45, all the way up till basically kickoff. So I usually only have like 20 minutes to recalibrate. And it's tough when news comes out, like in week one, when Raheem Mostert, when Trey Sermon was out, right? Like, you're trying to calibrate on the fly for something we didn't foresee happening. It's really hard. And some of that stuff can break a slate for you. And if you're on the wrong move, I actually 2 weeks ago, I overcompensated when Jamal Williams was out. I was on, I'm trying to think, I was on Darrell Henderson against the Texans specifically all week, was dialed in on Darrell Henderson specifically. And Jamal Williams was inactive on Sunday morning. Kind of, no one really kind of saw it coming during the week. And I reshaped a bunch of lineups and redid them with DeAndre Swift instead of Darrell Henderson. And, we know how that went. DeAndre Swift struggled to run the ball, lost a fumble, didn't do anything. Jamar Jefferson scores the late game touchdown instead of DeAndre Swift. Darrell Henderson scores 2 touchdowns. It was awesome. So it's tough to do that stuff on the fly without running projections like I did, right? Because if I would have ran those projections still, it would have increased DeAndre Swift but it wouldn't have helped him out to the point where I would have come off so much Darrell Henderson, because his projection obviously didn't change and was obviously really good.
Yeah. Well, are you, you mentioned kind of like your starting point for some of your lineup building, getting those stacks or those games you really like to target.
Mm-hmm.
How are you factoring in kind of thinking about the leverage points? If there is an obvious chalk that you either want to leverage or you just want to fade, or are you kind of, after building a lineup, checking, cumulative ownership and making sure this isn't too chalky? How do you kind of balance, getting in the plays you really like, but making sure it has, tournament winning upside?
Yeah, because like you said, typically if you build your lineup first, say like these are the guys I want to play without any other outside influences, odds are other people are getting there too with you and saying like because there's, with the information we have, everyone has access to it. The field's as sharp as ever. It's the most sharp it's ever been. So if you're getting to a specific player, odds are a lot of other people are getting there too, even if you think it's cool, right? Like this week, I thought, I was like, oh, like this is like I'm so locked and loaded on Mike Williams this week, and you start to see progressively throughout the week. Oh yeah, everyone else likes him too. Everyone else is like, yeah. So if you get there, someone else, odds are, probably got there too. You're not the smartest man in the room, basically, is what I'm trying to say, and you shouldn't operate like that. So I'm trying to then go back and look at, all right, well, these are maybe the 3 to 5 quarterbacks I want to play in the game. So then I'll look and see, well, how popular are these games going to be? And then that's what decides where I put those lineups though. Cause if I really like my Mike Williams skinny stack with Dalvin Cook, and then I want to run it with a Dak Prescott Cowboy stack with maybe Kyle Pitts, I need to see like what kind of popularity all these players are going to have in terms of ownership. And then that's going to dictate where I put those lineups and what field size I put those lineups, right? And that's going to that gives the breaking point for me. But I always want to start with the plays I want to play and I believe are good. I don't want to talk myself out of plays just because they're going to be highly owned.
Yeah.
I want to let the ownership decide where I'm going to place those plays, instead of, me coming off of them or outright fading them. So that's kind of how I use ownership. And like I said, on FanDuel, up until this week, because this week will be a little bit different, the ownership's been relatively flat. We haven't had these 40% guys to like really even say like, I need to outright fade this guy in anything. You just need to get more unique and how you build around those guys. So if I end up being on a super popular game stack, like say, Stephon Diggs and Josh Allen a couple weeks ago, it's not about avoiding playing Josh Allen, Stephon Diggs, but how can I get unique around those players and not play all the chalky guys in one lineup? But you can, the smaller the field size gets, you can do some of that stuff though.
Yeah. I feel like too, the thing I'm struggling with now is, I feel like I'll narrow down my player pool to, a few of the stacks, a few of the mini correlations, some of my one-off contrarian plays. And then it's like, how do I most efficiently get these puzzle pieces to come together? Because there's that moment every time you put in your stack you like, and then there's all these other plays. And so it's almost like I need like kind of a mini optimizer too, to be like, let me just narrow down my player pool to just these guys and then let the optimizer put these pieces together in the most efficient way, because that's where the kind of hand building, you run into the dead ends. I don't know. It's still always a tricky dance for me.
Yeah, it definitely can be. I try to use the optimizer as much as possible, and sometimes it covers a blind spot, right? Like you said, I might be on a guy for a write up, and then the optimizer will, or the projections will say something else, and I've got to recalibrate and say, oh yeah, this might not be as set in stone as I thought it would be. But on the other hand, a lot of people, optimizers are so similar, it could create a leverage point as well, where I say like, yeah, or maybe or certain things aren't factored in, like say like Devontae Smith last week, right? He's not going to really pop on anything in terms of like optimization or projections because of his opponent. But when you have 3 cornerbacks out, like a cluster injury to position, you have to at least like kind of find a way to factor that in, because no projection is going to cover that. When Michael Davis is out, Asante Samuel's out, and then in game, Ryan Smith tears his ACL. And granted, the Eagles only ended up throwing 17 passes, but he still got there on just 6 targets in a 17 pass game. If that game would have went in another direction and the Eagles would have had negative game script, I mean, man, Devontae Smith could have absolutely hammered, absolute his projection and won a lot of money for people, even more so than the people that were on him. So like you got to always recalibrate by Friday too. The defensive side, it's like projection they're never going to account for the defensive injuries, right? They just aren't. They're just like, we haven't gotten to that point yet. So even the the projections that do factor in defense and weights and that stuff is not still going to be able to account for specific players that are out. So you have to cross-reference a lot of that stuff too when inactives come out on Sunday too. You said we're just rerunning projections, but I mean, counting for some of these defensive plays that are out as well. Like, you know, when Harrison Smith is out last week, you know, right before the game, you know, what kind of impact does that make? You know, are the Vikings going to defend the deep ball is better? You know, losing that kind of asset on the field. So there's all kinds of stuff that goes into things that we still are unable to account for and carry a lot of minutia and nuance in terms of just trusting, you know, what the optimizers and the projections tell us.
Yeah, and that was one of the things I was kind of excited to talk to you about, because I think most people agree that there is this next level here of, if we were able to parse all that data and back test it and, you know, really start to untangle some of those variables that we just can't account for right now, that there would be these micro edges in these lineups. And it seems like you are kind of seeking some of those out, like talking about, man, I wouldn't even know how to interpret some of those defensive injuries, much less have the time to cross-reference it. But how are you thinking about those things? Obviously, injuries make sense. Like you said, if a good corner's out, okay, maybe that softens up the pass game. But are there specific kind of teams? I know funnel is obviously a buzz term far as looking for stuff like that. And that's what I always have a hard time with, because it's like, I know in really good projections, sometimes that should be baked into that. But how are you thinking about kind of these micro edges, making sure you're not double counting things twice at the same time?
Yeah, it's tricky. So, I mean, as someone that, you know, I do a matchup column, weekly matchup column every week, and there are multiple people that have tried to step into that and create their own matchup columns as well. And so there's a constant competition, especially now that I'm behind a paywall, you know, which for the first time in my life for the past 2 years wasn't something that I ever cared about. But now that I am, I want to make sure like I keep one. I mean, you always want to be improving, but I always want to make sure that there's an edge to say, like, there's a reason I want to come read the worksheet instead of, you know, reading this other article that's very similar to the worksheet, but that's for free, because I want to be able to incorporate, you know, those micro edges and make a difference. And, you know, there is the past couple of years with True Media and Sports Info Solutions now taking forefront outside of Pro Football Focus, joining that kind of dance. We've just gotten so much more nuanced data. You know, I'm still trying to figure out how to incorporate a lot of it, but there's still so much stuff that's just a very, very tip of the iceberg that we have access to, you know, and because here's the thing, when you look at like defensive matchups or matchups that in general, a lot of people, you know, for the forefront, even to this day, are still just using basically fantasy points allowed to position, right?
Yeah.
And we understand like there's a ton of like inherent noise cooked into that. And really a lot of defensive stats in general are just offensive stats. I've been saying this for years, and other people have said it too. It's not like, you know, I'm creating some new thing that everyone is getting enlightenment to. But your defensive stats are largely based on, you know, what the opposing offenses you ran into and what they do. Especially when you're talking about like target share and like yards allowed and stuff like that. Like when people say like, oh, so-and-so team is seeing the most targets to opposing running backs. And it's like, yeah, they just played Christian McCaffrey, Alvin Kamara, and like, you know, but I mean, you know, stuff like that. You see it a dime a dozen. But now we're starting to get all these defensive stats that are actually true defensive stats, or at least defensive, what I believe are like what I call, like, I want to refer to them as true defensive data points. And it's like scheme. What are defenses doing? How are defenses playing defense? Because that's stuff where you can ignore like what they give up, and then you can start to focus on, well, all right, if defenses are doing this, because a team like the Raiders, right, on Sunday night. So like the Raiders might alter their approach a little bit, but this is a team that's going to basically, they don't blitz ever. They're not going to start blitzing Patrick Mahomes. They live in basically, you know, single high coverage. They play cover three more of any other team. So then I can start to look at things like, all right, well, when the Chiefs do see cover three, like what do they do? How do they attack cover three? And I can get in some of the nuanced takes like that. You know, everyone time, you know, the buzzword this week was too high safeties, right? Too high shell. That took over this week. That's what's interesting about when the Chiefs on Sunday night, because the Raiders actually play the least amount of too high shell in the NFL. They play the most single high safety defense in the NFL. So we'll see if they alter approach. But even if they mix in more too high shell, or they're going to mix in their zone coverage a little bit, they're still not just going to start like outright all blitzing teams and do things like that. So, you know, there's a lot of nuance that we're still just scratching the surface on and finding out. I'm big on like pressure stuff and incorporating that. if you would have read the worksheet this week, you would have saw like Lamar Jackson splits against the blitz and saw like how that came to fruition last night and how much trouble that gave him in that particular game. But I'm looking at stuff like that. My biggest week of the season this week was a couple weeks ago when the Bengals played the Ravens, and the Ravens had just wrecked the Chargers. Herbert was another guy, like in the worksheet, I talked about like his blitz packet, against the blitz. This is what Herbert's done. Ravens are sending, 5 men plus. So this great amount of snaps, it could turn into a problem. But then it was the inverse for Joe Burrow in the Bengals. So it's like, this is a team you don't want to blitz. And if the Ravens are going to come out and blitz this much at the rate that they are, I mean, it's going to create all these one-on-one opportunities for T. Higgins and Jamar Chase, and they have the potential to absolutely get wrecked because Burrow's been so good against pressure and against the blitz, and that turned out that happened. I did have a little more T. Higgins than Chase to prevent me from winning real money, but like I got there pretty over that week, and that's kind of the stuff like I've started to like shift into and get into more now. Start to look at some of the defensive, like I said, approaches that they play. How much cover two is a team playing? Do they have to because they had a guy get injured? This week the Cowboys play the Atlanta Falcons, most cover two heavy team in the NFL, because the Dean Pease midway through the season was one of the more blitz heavy defensive coaches in the NFL, and they just weren't getting home. They weren't getting any pressure at all. So Dean Pease talked about like, I have to stop blitzing because what the hell is the blitz doing for us? Like, we're not getting there. Like, why would I just keep doing this? Why would I keep blitzing? So they've shifted and they've been more of a cover two team. So I might go under the hood and say, all right, well, when the Cowboys says cover two, like who's getting the most targets for them? And it's, Dalton Schultz and CD Lamb. It's like, all right. So like, it may be a little inkling, but stuff's still not as predictive yet. I wouldn't tell anyone like that. It's just little things I'm starting to incorporate and look at, and try to see if we can find those little micro edges on the field, because some people, like a lot of people are going to be on Dak Prescott stacks, but what if the signal is to be completely off on Amari Cooper, right? And then that might just give me enough leverage on the Dak stacks, just not having any Amari Cooper, right? So there's a way you can get unique with still having some of the chalky stacks and still having a little bit of leverage. But this stuff is still all very new, and we're starting to see like on-off splits and stuff like that. Like if anyone has access to stuff like at True Media, I mean, it's definitely like the GIF of Hugh Jackman in the fountain where he's just looking up. Like it can be an overload, but it's stuff that I'm starting to incorporate and just try to have an edge and be able to provide different information to my subscribers and my readership that is different than going to another site that has the same type of article, because there are other matchup based articles that you can find out there. So just very little stuff, but I'm still just trying to find my way on like some of this information. It's still also new.
Yeah. And I think what's cool about that too is, I think where people would get into trouble is if you were just trying to hand build your lineup based on all of these, kind of takes, or whether it's, liking certain situations. But, as Blender always says, you can play whoever you want as long as you're then building logical lineups and not sacrificing too many projected points around it. So like in your example, if you want to start with that Cowboy stack and you really think Schultz is the edge up on Amari or whatever, like good, you are now pushing that micro edge, and then you're going to make sure that the rest of your lineup has the right ownership relative to how chalky that's going to be, that you're not sacrificing too many projected points, So I do think there's a way to kind of have your cake and eat it too, because that's the other thing. Like on some of these big slates, there are lots of directions you can go. Sometimes there's 5-6 games or quarterbacks, and I'm like, yeah, all of these seem like they have a similar probability to finish as the top QB on the slate. And in those cases, it would be, I think, beneficial to have some of those micro edge tiebreakers that give you kind of the confidence to go in that direction with all things created equal.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, TJ Hernandez, I think, is really good at talking about this. He does a really good job of talking about, being contrarian and still understanding the balance of building lineups around that. So, I mean, it's absolutely a thing where people get scared off of the popular players because they're popular, right? We see this all the time in fantasy football and in DFS. We always you hear.
I'm guilty of this.
I mean, everyone is, because you get talked in and out of stuff so much. I found through like when I did stuff with like Eric Crane, and he was like the first person that kind of like taught me about like building out when I was doing like 150s at the time. It's just like more people get wrong. So if you are a max entry players, like people try to use that as having all the answers, right? Like covering all the bases. People treat multi-entry as like, you spread yourself out too thin. And then what happens is, you do have your hits, right? Like your low percent hits, but then they're paired, like you said, with other low percent hits, and you get no leverage. Your 5% receiver that gets there is with other 5% receivers, and you don't get there. And people, even when they max center build, they don't correctly build that way because they'll just follow the optimizer and put their ownership in, and you get too much cross building with like low leverage plays, right? And then you get too much. There's not enough balance in terms of getting that right amount of ownership. So there, it is definitely a nuance in that regard, in terms of kind of finding that finding that right balance of when to play the more chalky guys together and when not to. And like I said, I factor in like tournament size the most of all of that. Like what is where does this entry going into, and where can this be effective still?
Yeah. And on that note though, for some of those kind of defensive, stuff that you might be trying to attack, are there any specific situations that you're kind of always excited to be like, oh, I want to go see, who the Falcons are playing because this has kind of been a really exploitable thing? Or is it more just seeing how the puzzle pieces fit together, and if there's a really stark contrast that might be exploitable on a given week?
Yeah, I'm mostly looking right now with this data because like I said, it's all still so new. I'm really only looking for like the major like outliers, right? Like outlier type stuff. Or if it's like a chalky stack, like where can I get like a little bit of an edge, right? Like who has the better end of the matchup? Because like I said, with Dak in particular, because how it fits just this conversation, he has 3 or 4 legit players. And now you had Michael Gallup to the field, of like legit players that could get there in fantasy football. So we don't want to I don't want to make Dak lineups and just spread it all out, because my one Dak lineup, if Gallup gets there, might be paired with something that's not good enough, right? And I want to be, like I said, like the Hulk away. I want to end up just making I'm going to keep it as tight as possible, as tight as I can get it, because then if I'm right, I have leverage on everything. I don't have to worry about it. And then if I'm wrong, I don't have to worry about anything. I lost, so to speak. So if it's like a real popular play like that, I will go under the hood a little bit and see if like, all right, well, like I said, like who are the Cowboys when they play cover 2? Like who is the main beneficiary? Like where are the targets going? And like some of that stuff, even in this particular week, could be irrelevant because they haven't played any games with Michael Gallup.
Yep.
So you have that as a new wrinkle too as well. So, but that's where I'm using it. The Bucs have been a team like that because obviously everyone's playing Tampa Bay stacks every week, and typically double. Tampa Bay, Brady has to be the most popular double that we've seen so far this season. So they've had. Now Antonio Brown's out of the way, but when all 3 of those guys are there, like where can we get the edge, right? Like who do I want to be my double? It's like, because I have to ignore one guy. I don't want to just spread it around with all 3 guys. I actually do want to fade one of these guys because I want to be right, and if I'm right, I'm going to have a ledge in all these other Buccaneer stacks. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I feel like we've had some of those kind of wide receiver duos, that are always, priced similarly, have similar ceiling. And it's like, this week I'm looking at over on DraftKings. I mean, DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, they're priced within $300 of each other. And Leone's ceiling projection, they have the same ceiling. And my aggregated ownership, they have the same ownership. And it's like, I'm not getting super into the weeds on this stuff. So I'm like, well, I'll just play DK Metcalf because I like him better. But I mean, is that the kind of stuff then you would really go to look into and see, how are the Packers covering these specific types of wide receivers?
Yeah, absolutely. And, that's, might be like those guys are specifically like the most like thorn on everyone's side.
Yeah,
is it a DK week or not? Because it's crazy because when you look at like condensed target trees, you would think that because they both get such a high percentage of the team targets on a team that really doesn't throw a lot, there's really no third guy getting targets, that there would be a lot more games where they're good together. Yeah. And it's just not true. When they have 2 100-yard games together since DK Metcalf's been on the roster. It seems to make no sense, right? You think of it like a Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen situation, right? When Thielen and Jefferson, there's lots of weeks where they both get there. But the Seahawks guys, it's usually one or the other, and it's super frustrating. So yeah, like this week I might go under the hood and say, since Jair Alexander's been out and now Eric Stokes looks like he might not play either, that they've been giving up more to like these boundary receivers on the outside, guys that are typically, isolated in the perimeter, which would be DK Metcalf. And then I also factor in specifically with these Seahawks guys that DK Metcalf also had a consistently higher floor than Tyler Lockett, which doesn't matter so much in GPPs, but in the smaller field stuff, it does. Because if I'm going to have a lot of exposure to an 8K player, his floor still does matter too in tournaments. A lot of people think it's all or nothing, but the floor matters too as well. So DK Metcalf's had a lot more games than Tyler Lockett, where he might have 4 for 50 but he's had more touchdown production. He doesn't bottom out as much as Tyler Lockett. So it might factor into, some of that stuff too, in these tournaments where, if it's larger field or smaller field stuff, the floor still does matter in small field stuff. People will all say like, yeah, it doesn't matter at all. It's all or nothing. But floor does matter in smaller field stuff for sure.
Well, especially because, like you said, and I know Holka, and I've seen some of the contests. I mean, he's playing like 75-person contests sometimes, and I mean that's almost like a glorified quintuplet up, or whatever over there, which is different. And I'm very rarely playing. I guess the smallest I'll play is some of our tilt space will be like sub like or 200 to 300. But yeah, I mean the type of lineup that you need to put into a 200 field versus trying to win the 5,000 person SPY is wildly different.
Yeah, and that's what you got to look at. That's why I say like entry point is always still what matters. Game selection. That's how you should be building your rosters first for what games you're playing, instead of just building your lineups and saying, "Yep, I'm just gonna pop in on Sunday morning." Enter. These are the lineups I liked because they're more viable or less viable in certain different settings that whatever you're playing.
Yeah, and the two things I've been trying to use to help me decide which contest to put it in relative to like the size is I do look at my cumulative ownership. The chalkier lineup I'll be more willing to put in the smaller field. And then, like you said, also if I'm rolling out a huge game onslaught, or I'm just trying to basically play, players from 2 games, where I'm getting that, then I might be more willing to toss that into a smaller field, just knowing that, on FanDuel, you're going to have to get those touchdowns from a lot of different spots. And so when you're doing just a full on game stack, sometimes it's harder for all of those guys to access those touchdowns. So that's another situation that I'm willing to look at. We're going to plug the worksheet here again. Tony saying he loves to talk about the defensive schemes. Where could I find that information? Well, first of all, you need to be reading Reebs' worksheet over at Sharp Football. Are there any other kind of, primary sources for this defensive information that you like to look at?
Like I said, you got to have something to, like I said, True Media and SIS or what we, luckily I work for a company that has access to that stuff and, gets it. It's tough for the common man, even if you're like a huge because you hang with like the actual DFS bros that have like huge bank, even them, like, it's like, like Al Smith isn't going to pay $20K for a True Media subscription, but like, SIS is affordable. You could do like a monthly service there. And that's definitely affordable in season. You can get on that and get a lot of this information, even the reduced stuff that might not have the full access stuff, but definitely plug them. PFF, obviously, a lot of people have known PFF for a lot of years. They do some of the stuff that I think is more player specific, which can help. I like, that's the stuff you see more PFF stuff cited than any of the other stuff. Like where I said, where I'm talking like the defensive scheme stuff and stuff, they have that stuff behind the scenes, but it's not available to the public. Not even to me. I don't even have access to that stuff. So the team stuff that they're producing. So those are the main 3 though. And I would say True Media is the best, but it's the hardest to get access to. Yeah. And like Reebs said, next week, free week on Sharp Football Analysis. And another really good way to get access to Sharp Football, and I'll do a plug because I always write this up in the Matthew Berry Fantasy Life newsletter, is with the Roto Pass. You can get access to RotoViz and Sharp Football and Football Guys and other sites for one price. And I highly recommend that. I mean, Sharp Football and RotoViz are basically 2 of my favorite sites for consuming and reading content. So you can get those together. So I highly recommend that. We're working on some of this stuff for next year, incorporating some more tools that are more on some of the stuff that we talked about. Like blitz defensive stuff, like some of the defensive tools. Because if you guys have followed Warren and you go to that old Sharp Football stats site that's like an Angel Fire page, basically, some insider information that's all coming over to the new site. It's already actually there behind the scenes, so I've got to see it, and it's way cleaner and looks a lot better instead of that old site. But we're working on some stuff that's like our primary focus because we started out as a startup a couple of years ago, and we're trying to walk before we can run. But now that we're getting some footing, our next move is we want to incorporate a lot more of these tools and really enhancing some of the stuff that Sharp Football Stats had, and really building on some of the stuff that we talked about and having that available. Maybe by the end of this season, but definitely over the off season into the next season.
Yeah, for sure. Let's pull up the Sims here. I think we're generally always looking at the the DraftKings Sims, but it might be fun to pull up both of these and we can kind of just get a quick look at how maybe even some of the differences might be shaking out with the scoring over here. So I'll run the DraftKings main slate. No surprise, here to see Dearness Johnson up in 30% of the optimal lineups. Also not a surprise to see Jonathan Taylor. I guess one that stands out to me here would be Aaron Jones being so popular and even appearing more frequently.
Yeah, me and Hoka talked about this on his show.
Yeah, what do you think's going on with that?
We have no idea, but we talked about it though. Well, because it's so weird, right? So like 2 weeks ago, it made total sense for AJ Dillon to be involved to the degree he was. They had no wide receivers healthy. Obviously you're not going to just have Aaron Jones be out there 100% of snaps playing wide receiver and running back. But then, last week you would figure that even with Jordan Love, that it would be more of a two-prong system. They're going to try to insulate Jordan Love, give him easy throws. And they did nothing of the sort. I mean, Matt LaFleur, I was really disappointed in Matt LaFleur because it was the first chance I thought we were really going to see what Matt LaFleur brought as like a head coach and schemer. Like we've seen with like Sean Payton, right? Like when Drew Brees has been out, like what he's been able to do offensively and keep his teams afloat, even with sketchy quarterback play. And I was really disappointed at Matt LaFleur's game plan last week. But Aaron Jones, if you look at it in totality, especially where he's priced, because he should be priced like DeAndre Swift is on both sites. Yeah. But he's still being regarded as like this, top 5 running back. And we know he still probably has the potential to get there in any slate. But he's had just like 3 RB1 scoring weeks in the season. His playing time has started to dip, now in 3 of the past 4 games. He ran a pass route on a season low percentage of dropbacks last week. We've seen AJ Dillon start getting involved there in terms of running pass routes and getting targets as well. So it's really tough. I don't know, if the run the Sims, the projections are not accounting for more AJ Dillon or this, but it also could be hypervariant, right? Like what if just this week they play Aaron Jones 70% of snaps? It's a really gray area. It's hard to kind of diagnose because the sample is still really small of his playing time getting kind of jerked around. But it's also one of those things, if you're ahead on an early part of the trend and people are following these optimizers and these projections that are spitting out Aaron Jones, and you're not going to have any Aaron Jones, it's going to help you.
Yeah, I was just checking our inputs here to just see the split. 53% market share for Jones, 37% for AJ Dillon, 15% receiving market share, 5%. I mean, I'm not as in the weeds on these inputs, but like that split looks fairly reasonable to me.
Yeah, it does. I mean, he did have his lowest rate of touches in the game, but like, who's to say when Aaron Rodgers comes back? Like Aaron Rodgers doesn't want more Aaron Jones on the field, right? Like we don't. Like these are things we don't really have. Like we're privy to the conversation with. So it's really tough to kind of diagnose. But yeah, you always want to double check though the projections there and make sure that nothing's like off kilter. Like Brandon Bolden is popping right there too, but like how much is Brandon Bolden factored in just being the lead back?
Right.
Ramondre looks like he might play, and then it alters everything.
Yeah, and then also Brandon Bolden is going to be fairly game script dependent too, where if they're behind, then obviously Brandon Bolden's going to be playing all those passing downs, you would assume.
Which is something we'll never solve in DFS. Right. Like we do this all the time, right? How many times have you made a suboptimal DFS play because of projected game script?
Right. Exactly. and I mean, honestly, it is why I really like the Sims and looking at those lineups, and specifically for the showdown lineup, because they're factoring in these game script scenarios. Like in scenarios where Brandon Bolden is a great play and showing up in these lineups, well, then Ramondre Stevenson isn't going to be a great play because the game script or the touches are going to be going elsewhere. And these are the variables that are hard for us to factor in our head, but the Sims, can factor in those things and show us those different scenarios. Yep. And just to put a bow on the Aaron Jones, Devontae Adams thing, it is an interesting conversation for DraftKings this week because Adams is so mispriced. He's going to be really, really popular. And then with Dearness Johnson being, a free square potentially, I think you're going to have a lot of people paying up to get, their McCaffreys, their Dalvin Cooks or whatever. And I don't think Aaron Jones is going to be super popular because everyone's going to want to play Adams and everyone's going to want to jam in another high price running back. So it's, again, one of those obvious leverage spots with Aaron Jones here, on the Devontae Adams chalk.
Yeah, absolutely. I had a conversation with Davis Maddock too, that how much just of all this is opening up, because if Kamara misses too, you've got Mark Ingram in a situation where he's going to probably get 15 plus touches as well. So another log on the fire of these running backs, because where James Conner is priced in the middle. because typically we're going to see a lot of stars and scrubs lineups this week anyways because of the pricing. But how does this now impact James Conner, who would have been relatively chalky on like probably any other slate?
Yeah.
That he might actually come in he might come in a little bit under-owned because he's in pricing limbo, so to speak.
Yep.
Because, you're going to be able to get up to McCaffrey and Dalvin Cook with Ernest Johnson. So maybe you'll skip over that tier of pricing. So definitely something to keep monitoring throughout the weekend. I know on DraftKings specifically, Connor's projected rostership looks way under what it should be to me.
Yeah. Yeah, in Michael Duggar brings up too, the Sims haven't accounted yet for what appears like Kamara's not going to play. And so Mark Ingram at 4,500 is going to just be a jam for people there. And I agree. It's going to be studs and duds, and guys like Aaron Jones, James Conner, even DeAndre Swift maybe this week and Cordell Patterson, which happens every week. Maybe those guys go overlooked there in the mid sixes.
Yeah, and those are things that happen. So it's all things like kind of factored in. That's why you try to like stay glued to it a little bit. I mean, there's no way to get around Ernest Johnson though. Like, so people like will try to get cute and say like I have to fade him, but there's no reason for you to. Like, you have to play in the largest field. He's gonna be like 60+% even large field stuff. Like,
so how do you compare the spots? I mean, even just like throw pricing out of it, Mark Ingram versus D'Ernest Johnson. How do you compare those spots if Mark Ingram is the lead back?
Yeah, I mean, they're very similar because we've seen the Saints offense basically it's running through the running backs, and granted it's Alvin Kamara, so it's easy to do so, but they have no pivot, and there's no other healthy running backs in the roster. Tony Jones is hurt. Ty Montgomery's hurt. It's going to be probably Dwayne Washington as the backup. So like, you got a team that has no good wide receivers. They already don't really want to throw the ball anyways. They have a matchup that would tell them be more of a signal to attempt more passes, but that hasn't really been their offense. So he's going to get jammed with targets. We know, or jammed with opportunities. And we already saw 2 weeks ago when D'Ernest Johnson was in the spot when people already thought they were going to get cute with it. There's nobody else there. He's going to get 25 plus touches because that's how the offense is run. So the offense really isn't going to change. Like, the Browns offense isn't going to change how it's going to be run because D'Ernest Johnson, especially now that he delivered in a spot where they didn't alter it, right? So, I mean, there's just really no way to get cute with it. Obviously, the Browns there's more signal to the Browns that, like, they're going to be able to do what they want to do because they're not going to come off it. The offensive line is really elite. The Saints offensive line is good as well, but they haven't had their top 5 starting offensive linemen on the field together outside of 20 snaps this season because they've had so many injuries. But yeah, I mean, it's hard not to just fall into the Browns situation and say like there's so much more of a floor here and so much more predictability into what D'Ernest Johnson's going to get. Because even if he doesn't score and he gets 18 touches for 90 total yards, and you're like, oh wow, it was great to fade him, but like it's still like he's gonna be so owned that there's really there's no great leverage that you're getting by fading him.
Right. Yeah, that's going to be one I'm going to definitely wrestle with. And I am excited for Mark Ingram to also open up because that'll probably split that kind of ownership between those two, which I think would be pretty nice too, of just kind of lowering it. Because you could have seen scenarios with D'Ernest Johnson in small field could get up to like 65-70%.
Oh, even more. Yeah.
And then I started the GPP bro really fanning myself, being like, can I do this? But I was just showing the sim results here for the FanDuel slate. And again, you see D'Ernest just popping massively. And you see some of these other running backs, Jonathan Taylor, Harris, look like consistent good plays. James Conner looks way too cheap on FanDuel.
Yeah, and he's more of a FanDuel type of play, so he'll probably have more rostership anyways inherently there. Yeah, but he still also could be under, just because let's say James Conner ends up being like the 3rd most popular FanDuel play when you're like checking your rostership, but it still could be under. He still could be underowned. Well, like that's what people still don't account for, like those types of situations. Say like he ends up being 25%, but you've got D'Ernest Johnson at north of 35, and then you've got maybe Dalvin Cook or Ezekiel Elliott still hanging around there. I mean, you could still he could still end up being underowned, and where you come in and you have him on all your rosters and you're looking really good. Yeah,
for sure. Can we take you outside of your FanDuel comfort zone and build a DraftKings lineup to wrap up here?
Yeah, sure, man.
We gotta pump the Deposit Kingdom weekly league. It's a rake-free tournament we have on here. Looks like we still have only about half full here on a Friday. Oh, up to 259. I will drop the link in here. Great.
Rake free. Get in that.
Got the rake free. And if you are wanting to be a FanDuel bro this week, which I am going to be playing some, Holka also has a rake free FanDuel tournament as well. So take advantage of these rake free contests. And let's see here, Reebs. I know you said I'm curious. What's the stack? What's the game you're really liking to target so far this week?
Yeah, so my three core stacks will probably be around Justin Herbert, Dak Prescott, and Tom Brady. So we'll need to get unique with that. But looking at projected ownership right now on DraftKings, it looks like actually Brady's going to be the least popular of those guys. And we'll see what happens, because we'll see. Maybe that's because people just haven't really figured out what receivers they want to do. They're waiting on the Godwin stuff to kind of figure out.
Yeah, I'm seeing Dak Prescott up at 15%, and then Brady and Herbert around 7%. And then I do agree with you that if we get kind of clarity on the Buck stuff, that there might just be a really obvious double stack that everyone ends up playing.
So those are kind of what I'm glomming onto. And then I'll say, like, those are the games I like too a lot. Well, not really the Washington side, but there are run back potentials in there, especially on DraftKings with like a guy like McKissick or something.
Yeah.
The Cowboys game, like in larger field stuff, I might entertain going the inverse way in larger field stuff, and use my pit stacks with Matt Ryan or Cordarrelle, and then use the Cowboys stuff with that too, because that's just the game overall. The game environment will be hot as well. And then Dak, I believe Dak's going to be the most popular quarterback on both sides anyways this week. People love it. Except the field's too sharp. The flop lag is real. The Falcons, they still have a 30.2 team total. I think everyone's going to get there on Dak anyways. So you might, the way to be contrarian with your game stacks in that game and larger field stuff is to go with Matt Ryan. But like I said, you can also still play Dak and be plenty contrarian based on, like I said, just having either zero Amari Cooper or, going heavier on Michael Gallup, things like that. But those are the three guys.
How about this? Because I heard you mention him earlier, and I actually, from what I'm seeing, I don't think he's going to be super popular on DraftKings. You mentioned Mike Williams. You want to do something with a Herbert, Mike Williams?
Yeah, I love it, man. I love Mike Williams this week.
Yeah, give me the sell on him, because I think he was on fire to start the season, and then we've seen things kind of cool down. He's getting used more downfield, not getting kind of peppered with targets in the intermediary as much as he was at the start. What's the sell on Mike Williams this week?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I don't want to just keep like trying to plug my stuff, but if you've been reading the worksheet this season, all of Mike Williams' bad games were kind of highlighted as like pretty poor matchups for Mike Williams at the time in the worksheet, and signals were more geared towards Keenan Allen. Especially the past 2 weeks, I've written up Keenan Allen as the guy, and I've ranked him ahead of Mike Williams even when he is, in industry, because again, you play the Eagles, again, a zone-based team. Usually plays a lot of shell, but they had been throwing Darius Slay in man coverage on these, these alpha wide receiver types. They had mixed in more man coverage with Darius Slay specifically. He had just shadowed Henry Ruggs 2 weeks ago because he didn't shadow anyone against the Lions for obvious reasons. And he had just shadowed Mike Evans the Thursday night before that. So they had already given us a little signal like, hey, Darius Slay is probably going to shadow Mike Williams because he doesn't travel in the slot. You got a zone-based team anyways that is predicated on the lowest ADOT in the NFL, the Philadelphia Eagles. So you're going to have all these intermediate targets. This is why tight ends are so good against them too, because the defense is designed to have those passes go underneath. People used to do this all the time with the Dan Quinn Falcons defense and be like, the Falcons are terrible against running backs. It's like, yeah, the defense is designed to have you throw passes to the running backs and let the linebackers come and fill and make tackles. There's a reason why that is. And there's a reason why guys like slot receivers and tight ends have been mashing the Eagles. And that's, so there was a signal there. So, and against the Raiders too, earlier in the season, even he was on a steamer going into the Raiders game, the Monday night game. And it was like, hey, the Raiders just sit back and cover 3. And Casey Hayward's been awesome so far. Like, this might not be a spot to keep riding this wave, and so on. It wasn't. So I'm taking way too much credit for diagnosing these down moments than they have, and not enough variance, but I'm going to roll into it and plug my stuff and say that this is, when you look at the types of receivers and where the Vikings are giving up production, it's been to these guys, these alpha boundary guys, both CeeDee Lamb and Amari Cooper. Marquise Brown has 100 yards, DK Metcalf 107 and a touchdown, Jamar Chase 101 yards and a touchdown. So I look at the corollary and be like, yeah, people are attributing the wrong noise to why Mike Williams has had a depression in output, right? People think it's because the ADOT's gone up, but I actually just believe that you have an offensive that is inherently run by an intelligent player or an intelligent coaching staff and Joe Lombardi and Brandon Staley, and their edges have been to go to Austin Eckler and Keenan Allen, these tight ends, these matchups. But this looks like a really objectively good spot for Mike Williams to kind of have, his foot in the game plan and have an advantageous matchup. And Patrick Peterson's still out. Talk about Harrison Smith, still being out. So all those things kind of line up for me being kind of into the Mike Williams with the bring back with the popular Dalvin Cook of being maybe that be a more popular skinny, or more and more favorite skinnies.
Okay, I love it. So, and we also said we weren't going to fade Dearness Johnson as of this moment. So let's put Dearness in. And so you said I was going to ask you about maybe Thielen versus Jefferson, but maybe you like going the Cook angle here?
I mean, it seems like obvious reason. So I've been chasing this for a couple weeks too, and it's going to drive me crazy when this is the week that it happens. So for literally the past month, the Vikings have had the largest passing touchdown to rushing touchdown split in the NFL. It's still at 87%. Base rate is 62% in the league. Typically in a season, you might see a couple teams run hot, like around 80%, but they're due for more just natural rushing touchdown progression anyways. So I've been chasing some of these rushing touchdowns, and they're going to probably come in a matchup probably when everyone's on Dalvin Cook anyways. Yeah. And then the other thing too is the Chargers are a weird team to kind of get grass of this week because they still have injuries everywhere on the back end. Asante Samuel might play. I saw he's still in the concussion protocol, but it looks like Michael Davis still isn't going to play. I already said his backup, tore his ACL. He's definitely not playing because this is a zone-based team. They want to invite you to run the football, light boxes. Obviously everyone's on that narrative so far this season. But if you look at the Vikings splits against man versus zone, Thielen has been significantly worse than zone coverage this season than versus man coverage. It kind of makes sense a little bit because, a lot of people would say well, he's just like a tertiary, like underneath type of guy, but he's been getting more targets down the field. And Thielen's a guy too, that he's more of like a route runner type, right? Like he's going to win in one-on-one situations like he did against the Panthers. He didn't get there against Anthony Averett 2 weeks ago. He got the touchdown at the end of the game, but Justin Jefferson's had better zone splits. We've also had the coordinator, Clint Kubiak, come out and immediately say we should throw the ball more to Justin Jefferson.
Yeah.
When the offensive coordinator says hey, we should throw, I like stuff like that. It's stuff I'm going to care. It could be just coach speaking noise, but that stuff don't undersell that stuff either though, is what I'm saying.
So would you want to do maybe either a double stack or a double bring back? I mean, both Conklin and Jared Cook honestly look like they project decently at their price points. Cook 3,200, Conklin 3,400, or is there maybe a different direction you'd like to go?
I mean, what's the field size in this?
So this one, we're building this as the 500 person Deposit Kingdom tournament.
So you could in a 500 person tournament, just add Justin Jefferson, and if you have all the Vikings touchdowns, then the field is going to be really have a hard time. Just have all the Vikings touchdowns. In a larger field, I probably wouldn't go this way, having the running back and wide receiver. But in a small field, if you own all the Vikings, if Vikings score 4 touchdowns and Dalvin Cook and Justin Jefferson score 3 of them, you're going to be absolutely awesome.
Yeah.
And if Mike Williams ends up scoring, you're going to be absolutely destroying.
For sure. And I'm going to put in some cheap plays for us here just to kind of now to help save us. So I'll put in the Lions D. I'm not doing Gronk. I was going to do, I'm going to toss in OJ Howard just as a cheap tight end play. So that would leave us with 5,350 here for a wide receiver and flex. So definitely have some stuff we can work with. Is there maybe a mini correlation or another spot here that is interesting to you?
Well, you look at this team, and right now we have no exposure. We have one little bit of exposure to Brady. I was gonna say no Bucks exposure and no Cowboys. We have no Cowboys Falcons.
Yeah. So what are there any affordable pieces in that game that you like? I mean,
I think this would be a spot then to entertain Michael Gallup, right?
Yeah, for sure. So if we do Gallup, then that'll give us 6,700, which isn't too bad there. That puts us back in CPAT. You can play CPAT on the other side there. You got the Lockett, Pittman. You got James Conner. What do you think?
Yeah,
do you think for flex there?
I mean, so this would be a team. We could say we could run the mini, and with Patterson, it could be super fun. But also, we don't necessarily have to because we're pretty contrarian for even so we could play someone chalky like Connor in this lineup, and be completely fine. It wouldn't matter, and we're fine with the earnest, because we've got a ton of unique stacks, and we've got a lot of variation here to where we could eat a ton of chalk if we wanted to.
And the other nice thing, so
And you can go up at defense if you want now.
we can go up at defense, and our main stack and Connor are all late. So basically we can get information on how Gallup, Howard,
your one-offs
do. And then, if those one-offs hit, then we can let this lineup ride. If we're dicey, we still probably let the Herbert, stuff ride because that's not going to be super popular, but then we can come off of, potentially James Conner.
You have Connor. Yeah, you would come off of Connor, and then maybe shoot for something higher. So you can come up on defense now. Like you can plug in, if you want to leave the salary, we can have the extra money, or you can just go up to like the Titans defense without Kamara and just swerve into maybe they're the complete dumpster fire. The Saints. Also, if you look at the Titans, they're really underpriced. I don't know if you have like the screen if you're able to pull up. Like look at the points the Titans defense has been putting up.
Let me see. Let me pull this up. Yeah, I know the Titans are going to be the chalk defense this week. Just because they're the one team that's mispriced. But yeah, these points are absurd. 17, 12, and 16 the past 3 weeks.
Yeah, and you're playing nobody. I don't know who on DraftKings. I haven't really looked at the defense. I don't play there. FanDuel, it's not a great punt week on defense. And I know you guys have probably talked about this with you and Leone and maybe on the show. A really good way just to get unique this year is to not play a cheap defense.
Yeah.
I mean, literally, there's an edge in not playing a cheap defense this year.
It's so hard. I'm so guilty of it too, because you fall in love with all your plays and you're like, well, I got 2,400 left. So
you swerve into the variance. You're like, oh, it's a super variant position. I'll just go low. Maybe I run into some sacks or turnover. But there's been actually a big edge just going above that bottom rung tier. Even in the mid defenses, you can gain leverage because a lot of people are just punting defenses.
It's so true. Well, Rich, I really appreciate you hopping on. It was great to chat with you. I definitely want to spend some more time with the worksheet and kind of looking into these micro edges we discussed. You mentioned free week next week on Sharp Football. Anything else people should be keeping an eye out for?
No, that's pretty much it. That's really all I've got going. I do a DFS like pricing check article, and I do incorporate DraftKings there too because it's for everybody to play. Where you can just kind of see. I compare Fantasy Pros rankings, my own rankings, and then the pricing of everybody on the site, so you can kind of see like where everyone's different and potentially where you see I'm trying to get leverage on the field too, because you can see obviously if a guy is really popular in industry rankings, he's probably going to be popular in terms of rostership. And, there's an outlier. So I do that on the weekends, but that comes out every Saturday. I do the worksheet. They start coming out on Tuesday. So next week, if you get in there, the games will start being Tuesday. I update them throughout the week as news changes, all the write-ups for those. So there you have it.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, Rich. A couple plugs for me. I'm actually going to hop over to the Team Hold YouTube channel right now. We're going to talk about the Owners Club, the NFT meets DFS game. Zakari and I are going to talk through and build some lineups for that. And then I, of course, will be back on Sunday morning at 10:30 a.m. to do kind of a final cram here with all the updated injury news and all the steam and all of that good stuff. And hop in that DraftKings tournament. Let's get that filled so we can keep making that bigger. I appreciate all of you guys. I also have the audio version of this up on the podcast feed. It's In a Vacuum is the name of the podcast feed. You can search for that anywhere. Again, thank you to Rich. Have a great weekend. We will see you guys Sunday.